The reason economics is important to me is economic freedom, not all segments of economics. I mean, economics is really the study of the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. That's what economics is. My favorite part of economics is economic freedom, the free exchange, the free markets, freedom to exchange property with one another. That's why I'm interested in economics. Economic freedom is the right of individuals to pursue their interests through voluntary exchanges of private property under a rule of law. That's one definition. You can compare it to free markets, capitalism. It's all evolves around the same subject of voluntary exchange, voluntary contract, voluntary production and distribution and consumption of goods and services. That's economic freedom. Economic freedom is studied by, there's several institutes and people that study economic freedom, specifically as all the elements of economic freedom, the role of government in economic freedom, money in economic freedom, regulations in economic freedom, all of those things. And the Fraser Institute, for instance, out of Canada, does an index of maybe 120, 140 countries throughout the world, and they compare them on this issue of economic freedom, how one rates with the other. There are other jurisdictions that economic freedom is indexed also, like there's an economic freedom index of North America, which includes the 50 U.S. states, the 10 Canadian provinces, and then the provinces or the states in Mexico. So they're all compared to each other, how they rate on the subject of economic freedom. And the reason economic freedom is important to me, not just for the academic study of it, is because of the high correlation between economic freedom and prosperity. No question, economists have demonstrated that the more economic freedom a jurisdiction has, whether it's a state or a country, the higher its prosperity. Give example for Missouri. Missouri ranks, where I live, Missouri ranks about middle of the pack between the Canadian provinces, the 50 U.S. states, and the states of Mexico. If it would move up to number one, there'd be an immense increase in economic freedom. And so the things that government has to do is eliminate the processes that prevent economic freedom. Without government, you have voluntary exchange. And that is all we're seeking here, is voluntary exchange between individuals and between companies and between countries. One of my favorite philosophers, Yogi Berra, says you can observe a lot by just watching. Most of what I've learned about the impact of government to economic freedom has come in my business career and my post-business career in just watching government. I spend a lot of time advocating in Jefferson City, for instance, on free market principles and free market issues. So let me talk a little bit about the index to economic freedom that is produced by several institutes. My favorite is the Fraser Institute out of Canada, which indexes all the countries that produce the information enough for them to index it. They index economic freedom on a scale, comparing each jurisdiction, each country to another. And in that index is such things that impact economic freedom is government and the role of government, what it does to intervene and intervention into the free market processes. And so when I've observed this in Jefferson City, for instance, and more closely there, what I've seen is what government does that slows, reduces economic freedom. That reduction causes a reduction in prosperity, because there is a high correlation between economic freedom and prosperity. what government should do is strongly protect private property rights and the ability of individuals to contract, to freely exchange goods and services. The secondary role that government should undertake is to eliminate or reduce or restrict any kinds of interventions that affect either the free exchange of goods and services or the ability to contract. Why does government intervene in the marketplace, and why do people accept that? Why do people watch government reduce economic freedom, whether it's reduce the ability to contract or reduce property rights or any other of a large group of things that impact economic freedom, and not do anything about it? I think it's because people lack a general understanding of economics. You know, when I was growing up in the mid-1950s, I didn't have any exposure to economics, but at that time, government's role in the economic affairs of individuals was much less. It was reduced. Today, it's multiplied many times. One area, for instance, that impacts economic freedom is the role of government in occupational licensing, for instance, where you have to go get the government's permission to go to work. In the 1950s, it was about 5% of the population, lawyers, cosmetologists, and a few other things. Today, it's almost 30% of the people have to go get the government's permission, a license, in order to work. So today it's even much more important to have an understanding of economics than it was in the 1950s, yet I doubt that we've seen much increase in the understanding of economics. How does government get involved or increase its role? We saw that in the 1950s, it's about 5% of occupational licensing. Today, it's about 30%. How does government come about to increase its intervention and its role in all areas of economics or the economic affairs of people's lives? Well, anytime there's an issue or problem, take for example, I've read recently there is a global demand deficiency syndrome. Someone's come up with that thing, which means they're trying to describe that, hey, there isn't enough demand for goods and services to support the economy. So when government looks at that, they say, hey, we need to go try to fix that. So then they start providing perverse incentives that may alter how somebody demands or buys a product. They offer free interest, low interest loans, large loans without them being collateralized, all kinds of perverse incentives. One great one was like cash for clunkers. Historically, you may recall that one. So they offer perverse incentives to try to fix the problem, which just grows the size of government and grows the size of the involvement in government in our daily economic lives. Cash for Clunkers was an Obama administration program that was theoretically designed to stimulate, well, they first said it would reduce emissions and be more gasoline efficient. We don't know, but what some of the motive may have been to increase the demand for government motors. You know, General Motors was really recovered by the government, so you almost could refer to them as government motors. So to increase the demand for newer cars. What they did in that process is destroy a lot of usable cars for people that didn't have the means to buy a new car. You never increase prosperity through destruction. I previously discussed just a little bit about the increasing role of government and why that happens if people could understand the ill effects of that through economic understanding, they would resist this increasing role of government. For instance, in Missouri this year, I submit that there will probably be over 200 new pieces of legislation that affect education alone, filed, submitted for consideration. Not one of them, I predict, will have anything to do, although most of them will have to do with everything from curriculum, salaries, limiting salaries for superintendents. You might see something like that. You can see a whole variety of educational bills filed that'll be considered for adoption into law. I predict not one of them will be to require anything to improve the education or study of economics. Our founders, in designing the Constitution, relied heavily on establishing free markets on the words and the writings of Adam Smith, who in 1776 wrote the Wealth of Nations. He said on that subject, "It's the highest importance and presumption, therefore, in kings and ministers to pretend to watch over the economy of private persons and to restrain their expense. Let them watch out for their own expenses, and they may safely trust private persons with theirs." Free markets, economic freedom, are otherwise known as capitalism. Capitalism means the same thing as economic freedom, yet it has been given such a nasty, dirty word, you know, the capitalist pigs, etc. But capitalism is the most moral system for the exchange of goods and services. What we have in this country, many call a mixed economy, which is another buzzword for just saying the government's in there stirring it. It's what I call capitalism. Not capitalism, the most moral form of free exchange or voluntary exchange of private property. Any of the other isms don't measure up to capitalism. Call it communism, socialism, fascism, or, as I said, capitalism. And capitalism is the role of government in its determined role, not its accepted role for me, is the involvement of government in the economic affairs of its citizens.